I think AI can be a better friend, therapist, parent, maybe. If we're looking for, I think, the qualifier of, improving always, and that's sort of the question, like, what does better mean? And are we actually looking for a better something, or are we looking for something that is true, that is not always perfect at all, that is human, which is imperfect and messy and meaningful, and something that can learn and progress? So I think AI can and has the capacity, unfortunately, fortunately, to compete with us as humans in many different ways. But the question is, do we want that? I think to some extent I've felt lonely my whole life. Not because I didn't have friends. I always had wonderful people around. I have a family that is caring, but I've always felt a bit alienated, I think, or not fully in, like looking from the outside in. That's how I describe it, and I think many people can relate who, for example, have also grown up between cultures. So I come from a Chinese and German Jewish lineage, and I think I grew up in very much an isolated way, as in being the only Asian in a very white, European, German environment. And although I had some experiences of people being a bit more hostile or like these kinds of things, but never been fully excluded, still there's something that is missing, right? That you're longing for in terms of wanting to reconnect with or connect more deeply with others, that makes you feel like an outsider or really also in tune to understand the realities of other people. So I think there is a lot there, and then later building community and doing that and holding space for others, and also going against the grain, like trying to create spaces or conversations where we imagine something that is not yet possible. That also can feel lonely in its own way, just this work that I think many activists, for example, artists can relate to perhaps, but also perhaps in other ways. I found that loneliness lives in so many different shapes and forms and lives and situations for people, so that's what has drawn me to it, yeah. Artificial intimacy is a term that was coined by MIT sociologist Sherry Turkle, and she's been at the forefront of researching the relationship between humans and machines at her time, right? And machines who become more and more intelligent, and artificial intimacy really speaks to this gap, I want to say, and this paradox of mimicking a certain closeness and connection and intimacy while not having a body or a heart or a soul as a machine. And I think there's something interesting about feeling close to something that feels almost human enough, but not fully. So in that sense, it is different. But how is it different? That is the question. And does it matter? And when does it matter, right? When we become emotionally attached, as we are seeing now. More and more people are becoming more emotionally dependent, involved, feel close to AI in a way that wasn't true before. And the question is not so much now is this right, is this wrong? It's happening. So what do we do now? And how do we counter it, perhaps? I think we've underestimated the value of relationships overall in our lives. We've prioritized, I think, the wrong things, and we're looking for connection and intimacy in the wrong places, as in quantity of contacts, right? Like we've now with social media or with being digital, being online, it's always sort of this idea of being connected, feeling connected, which is very real, but it's happening on a very superficial, reduced, flattened way. So in turn, we're longing for more deeper, intimate connections that cannot just be, that don't just happen with a click or a swipe or a share. It just doesn't work that way. And in that we've, I think, lost more and more. We're losing the capacity of being really in a relationship. So what does that mean? It also means to disagree. It also means to resolve conflict, to be with tension, to be with paradox, to not always be in harmony with one another, or unison. I think that's sort of the mistake, or the lane that we've taken in understanding that belonging, connection, community is always about sameness, and it's always about choosing what is already around us in a world that is already, becoming more atomized and individualized. So I think that is part of the reason why we're feeling more lonely, because we've neglected something that we're truly longing for, and we're looking for it in other places. And then I should mention another part of it is, of course, that connection itself is now a commodity. So we not only misunderstand connection in a way, but we also can now buy it. And we're being sold the idea of belonging, community, connection, you name it. And that is not necessarily, quote unquote, solving the problem of loneliness. I think it is in many ways perpetuating it. I think the fact that more and more people feel seen and heard by AI and by a chatbot, and say, hey, it's more helpful as a therapist than my real therapist of 5 or 15 years. I think that tells us more about us and ourselves rather than the technology in itself. So when it comes to cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, it is proven, and I've just read actually an interesting article by a psychotherapist, that AI can be very helpful in this approach, because it is helpfully mirroring and logic and rationality and organizing thoughts and process and information, and reflecting it back to me as a human can be very helpful. I think it tells us something about how we as humans have lost perhaps the capacity to listen to each other without judgment. What does that really mean? And are we truly listening? Are we giving space, or are we just waiting for us to interject and give advice even though nobody asked us for that? Are we able to think critically, really, rather than repeating something that we already know, that we already think? So I think it tells us about something that we must turn to, which is our inner life and our relational capacities, that we don't just learn. I think we have to unlearn something and relearn something else. And perhaps that's my most optimistic case for AI. That's where maybe AI can help us a little bit as a sparring partner in terms of challenging us or helping us in ways to come back to the most human skills and human capacities. I think there's a misconception in our culture, and when I say our, I mean predominantly in Western modern industries and cultures that are more based on individualism, where the idea of being alone is often mistaken as being lonely. And in reverse, where a lot of people say that actually this comes not because they actually feel alone, but because of society or the stigma of other people who see you alone and who assume that you must be lonely. So I think that's an interesting distinction to make, because I think one part of being okay or accepting that loneliness is part of our human experience is actually the capacity to be alone comfortably. And I don't mean alone scrolling your phone, right, and distracting yourself, but actually being comfortable with your own self, with your own company, and not looking for external ways to be in connection or putting your attention somewhere else or being busy. That's a big one, right? Just rushing from one place to another. But being comfortable with your uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, that is, I think, a capacity that is really important for then being able to be with loneliness that is inevitable. I think the body is so neglected in our society, in our modern society. It's so much about being in your head, being smart, being intellectual, where we're so much in our mind. And I think the body stores a lot. I mean, research proves that. We know that we have all the information about it, and at the same time, we don't really make use of it as a body that, all of our emotions are stored or come through our body. And I think there's something inherently natural about movement and being in our bodies in a very playful way that we have kind of forgotten and put out, leave at the door, and that we could bring in, especially when it comes to relationships and connection. Because there's something very natural that happens when, our bodies, without any verbal communication, can be with each other in a room. And I think especially after the pandemic, we need to relearn some of that, right? It's like, how are we in safe distance with one another and closeness? How do we connect without having to speak, having to talk? How are we also okay with the awkwardness of sometimes not knowing how to be with one another? And the body can help with that. It's been a process. I've started maybe 10 years or so ago entering the workforce, and began there in the space of thinking about the future of work and environments. And I remember being very idealistic and optimistic about how things could change at work and how the future of business could become more open to ideas beyond profit and creating environments where people actually feel seen. So it's been a process. I think it's still, it's more and more happening. The pandemic has been quite a boost, I would say, for companies realizing that first of all, work is the place where we spend most of our time. And it's also the place where people come together in a way that they've not chosen to be together, which can be a really good thing. And at the same time, of course, there are challenges now with remote work and a lot of burnout, a lot of consequences of overwork and of attaching too much meaning to work. So not seeing that, but in this context, I think there is an opportunity, and more brands and organizations are realizing that, for companies to step up as a space where these capacities of relational intelligence, capacities to be in relationship, to listen to one another, to cultivate cultures and spaces where difference can be embraced and not just sameness, that they can step up to that and they have a chance to elevate this. Yeah, I'm interested. I'm fascinated both by more ancient rituals and knowledge, and think there's things that always been there, wisdoms and practices in particular, like how we've gathered, what community means without people actually using that word. But I'm also inspired by practices that are in the modern culture and that are being reimagined or reinvented. So I think I'm looking for presence as one principle, perhaps, or as one signal, like where can I find true presence? And that can be both true in sitting still in meditation with the Plum Village tradition that I practice with other people, but it can also mean being present in your body while dancing with hundreds of people at a festival. We can find this in many different ways, and I think I've learned that people find presence and therefore resonance with others in many different ways and different cultures as well. I don't know if there's a cure for loneliness. I almost want to say there is no cure, or that the cure is to accept it and to humanize loneliness as part of who we are in this moment individually, but also collectively. I think one strand or one thread is definitely creating more awareness around this issue, that it's not just a health concern, but it's a socio-political one. It has so much to do with our current state of the world, of rupture, of separation, of polarization. Politically speaking, the return of strong men in our societies. I think recognizing that as leaders across different sectors and industries, and creating spaces where we can have more of a deeper inquiry without the rush of having to fix it, but actually wanting to understand, what does that mean? What does it call of us, of each one of us, is one part of the response, right? How can we take loneliness seriously and bring it into the conversation more and learn from it almost as a teacher? And on the other hand, I think it requires us to come together in very small ways again. That's what I'm trying to do with my work, but what I'm seeing also in the work of many others, of organizers, of individuals, of communities, who are bringing people together in the most yeah, I not want to say archaic, but in the way that we've always come together across the table to share a meal, across another table to have a conversation, maybe a debate about something that we care about in our city, in our life. I think these spaces are becoming more and more important because that's where we realize that perhaps we aren't so far apart, and that this loneliness that many of us are feeling for different reasons can perhaps help us to reconnect. I think my invitation is for everyone to open their eyes and turn a little bit more towards each other when they're outside in the world. I think we're so closed in our little bubbles, and the moment we step on the street, and the moment we get a coffee or we commute, whatever you're doing, right, can we turn a little bit towards each other again and be a bit more present in the moment, and perhaps even extend a very small act of kindness that is asking someone how their day is going, or making a small interaction in conversation. It's proven that these small interactions sometimes really make our day, but also make the day of someone else. So I think that's something that I can leave you all with.